Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Mid.Life.Artist Podcast. If you are returning, thank you so much, and I'm glad you're here. And if you're new, oh my gosh, welcome. I am super pumped that you're here. Thank you for being here. I am your host, Brandy Reynolds. I've got a corporate day job. I'm an artist, and I am in the middle of my life. And I really like talking about how things have changed in art and how I think about art and spirituality with people who are also in the middle of their life and juggling art with real world things. Make sure to check out the previous episodes. If you are new, there's some great guests that we've already had. And I think you will love today's guest, who's Evan Quinn. Her day job is brand strategy and website building, but she is also an abstract artist, and she gives a really great and wonderful perspective on not only the strategy side of art and business, but also her thoughts and her process on her personal art and creative outlets. I would just like to mention that Evan very bravely shares one of the reasons her art came about, and that was through a deeply sad personal loss of hers. So we do discuss loss and grief. I just wanted to make you aware of that. Be good to your hearts, and welcome Evan Quinn. Hello, hello, hello. I am Brandy Reynolds, your host. Everyone meet Evan Quinn. Evan Quinn, this is everyone. Evan is an artist. She's also a creative coach, and she does all sorts of like cool branding and like digital kind of stuff out there. Like if you go to her website, it's like the coolest website. Evan, do you want to tell people where, just right off the top before we dive into it, do you want to tell people where they can find you?
Yes, you can find me at evanleaquinn.com. My website right now is like more focused on like the branding, coaching side of things, but I'm aiming to turn that into more of like an art hub over the next little while. So keep an eye on it.
And you know what, honestly, for those a little bit behind the scenes, I sent Evan a ton of questions when we were first talking about this, because I'm really focused on her particular art journey, like your creative, right? But then I was like, you know what? She does do branding and sort of creative coaching and stuff. So I thought we could start for a few minutes with that topic.
Okay. Sure.
And then we can dive into the really juicy personal artistic stuff. So Evan, as a sort of, digital creator, branding specialist, creative coach, I would love to kind of get your thoughts specifically around social media. If you have any insights or broad, maybe pointers for those of us trying to navigate being artists in a social media saturated space.
Yeah, I don't know. It's tough because it's like everybody wants to be on Instagram, especially when you're, a visual person. But the algorithm is just kind of like, I don't care about you. It seems like they're, more focused on, of course, it's been forever. They're more focused on reels. And now it seems like Instagram is more focused on carousels, which I think is kind of good because like maybe it's coming back to more like stills because of that, which I would like to see. Mm-hmm. But I'm also seeing like YouTube, it seems to be like the place that people are growing the most, like consistently. YouTube this year is like really, for whatever reason, like prioritizing new creators and like getting eyes on their stuff. So that's been really hopeful for me as like someone who's getting ready to start a YouTube channel. And the other thing is, of course, like we're seeing a lot, everybody's on Substack now or similar. I'm getting ready to launch on Ghost, which is basically an alternative to Substack. But
we all want to be bloggers from 2006 again.
Yeah, I want to go back to that internet. Yeah, I do. I want to go back to, like, we were talking earlier about being on a message board, and like I want to like connect with people that way now. I don't want to have to like scroll forever. Like,
and I don't want, like, it's just gotten seemingly more divisive and just more negative. I don't listen, since the internet there's been trolls, right? But I don't remember sort of the discourse being quite at the level. And I don't know if that's just because there wasn't enough people on. So the people that were on, and now more and more people have gotten on. So it's just like a statistical game at this point. Like the more people you have, the larger section of maybe more negative people. But yeah, of course, that was also 20 years ago. So maybe I'm just being very nostalgic.
Yeah, I've been being nostalgic for the internet all day. But Yeah, I think it's because, well, there are younger people out there, and then there are people who are like I can just hide behind the screen and like get all of this aggression that I'm not expressing,
Yeah.
in a productive way out at
Yeah.
strangers on the internet. And
Do you
it's
have a
easy to
social
forget.
media pet peeve? Like, just it doesn't even have to be like branding related, but just like in general.
I don't know. The first one that comes to mind is like it's really not that much of a pet peeve, but just like everyone is doing like POV videos, but then it's like not actually from the point of view of anything. I'm like, just say
Right.
like, this is what
Right.
it looks
Just
like
say,
when
I
I'm
wanted to
doing this
make
or
a
whatever.
video
But
about
like,
this. Right.
yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah.
mine is kind of related is like, if I ever hear anybody saying anything about a trending audio, I immediately, like, for whatever reason, that is just I don't care. I will purposely go find a different song. If I ever find out a song I wanted to use as trending, like for some reason, I'm just like, why does everything have to be so like you have to do it
Do
this
what
way? If
everyone
you,
else is doing. Yeah.
yes, yes.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
I get that too with like even like editing stuff on CapCut. It's like you pretty quickly realize like, oh, this is all like a template that somebody's using. And then when you like go and interact with the rest of the greater internet, it's like, oh, they're just using that template.
right, right, yes. So getting back to one of the things that I have seen, I feel like in the last few years, is you start to share more, as you said at the top of the conversation, about your personal art, which has been one of the reasons I really wanted to talk to you because it speaks to me a lot. Like it's just something very emotional and evocative about it. I just really picture like a lot of jagged coastlines, and it just like the way you and I both spent time in the Pacific Northwest. The way Pacific Northwest coastline
Mhm.
is is evocative in a much stronger way than just like a stretch of just like tropical beach.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and the
Um,
Maine coastline is similar where it's like I have a little postcard that a friend of mine made a while back that says, "Welcome to Maine. Our beaches are just rocks."
right, right, something like that. So I was wondering if you could kind of back up a little bit, because my understanding, or at least as I knew you, uh, more showcasing sort of the business side, the digital side, and the branding side. To back up and talk about your personal art journey and how that started for you.
Okay. Yeah, I think of myself as a new artist, but really I've been keeping art journals since I was 19, so since like 2003. And I've done that, life ebbs and flows, but like pretty consistently I've had a creative outlet. The current iteration of my work that I'm in and where I'm like wanting to focus more on that in this phase of my life started evolving this way well, it wasn't in 2020, but as a result of everything that happened to me in 2020, which, as you know, I had a baby the first week of the pandemic, and then a few months later, my husband died suddenly and unexpectedly. So it was just like a ton of upheaval. Like I had a baby; it was very isolating to be a new mother at that time, and then I lose my partner, and I was allowed to see like two people, my sister and my mom. Even like by the time my husband died, we were kind of in a pod with them. But anyway, so I didn't do a lot of creating in 2020 where I was like, kind of in the thick of it. But as I started to, my baby turned a year, like I started to kind of get my feet under me in 2021. I always say that like art saved me. Like it was kind of a tether to, this inner self that had otherwise been reinvented. Like had this identity shift from being like someone who ran like a lucrative business for 60 hours a week to a mother who worked part-time, and from being a wife to being a widow. So really like pouring myself into that creative outlet, which I did in the hours after my baby went to bed, just kind of kept me tethered to myself, which I think really like literally saved me during that time in my life.
So tell me what you think about this. There's been a trope, and I feel like it's maybe going away, but there is a trope, longstanding trope about the starving artist or the suffering artist, like you have to suffer for your art. But
Mm-hmm.
I have never been able to create when I'm in those dark times because art is about life and hope
Huh.
for me. And I'm wondering if that's maybe if you kind of agree with that or kind of what your thoughts are on that and maybe some thoughts there.
Yeah, it's a good question. I definitely don't believe in the starving artist thing necessarily. Like, I don't necessarily believe that. Oh, no, I absolutely don't believe that you have to suffer for your art. You can create art from a place of joy and healing. And for me, it's been both. Like, there were definitely times when, I'm like flinging paint on a canvas and like crying my eyes out because it just, for whatever reason, the like grief really hit that night. And even then it was like cathartic. And, you know, maybe those pieces weren't things that I would share, or like they were just, you know, messy things that we worked past. Especially like my work on canvas, I do a lot of layers. So that's a good way to like kind of like I get the grief out on the canvas. Like it has like that layer of my story, but then most people never see that. So yeah, for me, I think, you know, my art can come from grief and
Fair enough.
depression and from joy.
Okay. And so when you were art journaling, is the style similar to the art that you are sharing publicly now, or was it more collagey? Like, what has there been an evolution in how you
Yeah.
create?
So the first artist that I like remember really loving, and this would have been, you know, late 90s, early 2000s, was Sabrina Ward Harrison.
Oh my God,
Her book,
yes.
her book
Is that
Spilling
is that
Open
how
was
you found
like
the message board that we were talking about?
probably.
Because I think that's how I found it.
Yeah, probably. I know my best friend introduced me to the leader of that message board, but yeah, so I was really into her work that's kind of like collagey and messy, and of course like my stuff didn't look anything like her like beautiful stuff, but it was a starting point. But I've largely moved away from that. Even like, you know, 2017, 2018, I was still doing a lot of that, like, you know, ripping stuff out of magazines and like, you know, just putting, you know, paint everywhere and not really caring about composition. And then I just got away from that entirely until this year. I kind of intentionally decided to bring that sort of messy stuff back. And I have what I call like my leftovers book. So like when I have leftover paint from working on a piece, I just like put it in the book, and it's like the book is, most of the pages are horrible. Like they're you wouldn't want to look at them, but it's still that fun outlet of like, I'm not thinking about what I'm doing. It's just putting paint on a page.
And then, so for people, for reference, there's a piece of Evan's behind her, that abstract, horizontal, kind of larger piece behind her. I'm wondering, what is your attraction to abstract art? And it's and a sub question of that is, you know, how does abstract art help you express or create meaning?
Yeah. I have, gosh, I've never tried to put this into words, I guess, but for me, it's like about being in the flow of like, you know, creating, and it's like largely intuitive. Like I don't necessarily, you know, have like a palette picked out at the beginning. Sometimes I do, sometimes I experiment with that, but it's really like, what does this painting need? Like what, you know, am I looking for something solid here? Like, am I like trying to ground myself? And, you know, kind of that overlap of like, what's happening to me internally, and, you know, how those emotions are being expressed on the page. It appeals to me, abstract art appeals to me for that reason, but it also appeals to me in that, like, I think folks can kind of take what they need from it. Like, just because I painted it in this way and this represents, you know, X, Y, and Z to me doesn't mean like the person who's looking at it or the person who purchases it has to have that same, you know, interpretation. So I just like the idea of creating work that will move someone in a way that, yeah, I don't know, like it gave them what they needed, even though it was something else to me. So
Yeah. And it gave you what you needed, and it'll give them, and it might be completely different what they needed than what you needed at the
yeah,
time.
right, exactly.
We're taking an art class a long time ago, and they introduced to me the idea of symbols having meaning, and it was something that I had not thought about before. Because again, for people who don't know, you know, there's obviously like abstract color, but there's also some pen and ink work, it looks like, or you know, kind of drawing like their shapes and figures and lines. Does that hold a meaning for you, or is that also just really intuitive and kind of free flowing?
It mostly happens intuitively, but over, I don't know, the past year or so, I have gotten into like, you know, most of my work has like some sort of like big sort of organic shape. I also really like asemic writing, so like kind of scribbly writing that you can't really read. So the more organic shapes I feel like are kind of a grounding container, and I just kind of deal with those intuitively. Like once they're on the page, sometimes I fill them with a solid color, sometimes I work mostly around the outside of them. But it is just like something that's like, this is a container for probably whatever is like the biggest, emotion that I'm working through at that time.
Oh, yes, containers. So I will tell you this, and it kind of leads me into a next question. One of the things I'm drawn to is because your shapes and drawings are so organic and not really super structured. They remind me of nature a lot. So they're very evocative of nature. But to hear you say it, like now I see it, I kind of can see containers to hold. But I'm wondering, is there any connection to nature? Is that anything that you feel the need to express, or maybe no? You're connecting to something else.
I spend a lot of time in nature. I consider myself like a nature person. So I definitely draw, inspiration from that. But I don't know that I would necessarily say like, oh, this is representative of sitting by this mountain or anything so like literal. Although I did just sign up for an e-course on colorful landscapes, and the artist, excuse me, I have a little frog in my throat. The artist doing them will take like a reference photo of nature and then paint it in like wildly different colors that are just like so vibrant and fun.
Whoa.
So I'm really excited to experiment with that. I've really only done abstract work. So doing something that's kind of like an abstract or like a surreal, like landscape sounds really fun. And I'm interested to
It
know
does,
like how it'll
especially
work.
because speaking of Maine, when I see pictures of Maine, like the Maine coastline, like we talked about, or Acadia National Park, it's all the greens and browns and dark blues. And so I'm so excited to see what you do that with a completely different color palette. I'm thinking like neons and like,
Yeah,
what
yeah.
is it going to look like? This evocative Maine, rugged and like wild, but it's like hot pink.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So I'm hoping that I can kind of combine sort of what I'm doing now and that like kind of landscape experiment in a more like literal way with still, still using a lot of colors, which I need all the colors.
And I know you've been kind of working on maybe putting some stuff up on YouTube. And what are your ideas? Like, what was the idea there? And what would you like to share in that particular medium? Are you going to be doing more like process videos or talking about the art process? I'd love to know more about that and your thoughts.
Yeah. So the first video that I'm getting ready to put up is just a process video. I've had a number of people say like, oh, I would love to just like watch how a painting comes together. It'll be that. I think I'll probably also share where I want to be with my like art content creation is like I really want to be helping people, um, you know, busy professionals, like primary parents, like people who just think they don't have time to be creative, like kind of carve out that container for themselves, like to be more creative. So I'm seeing I'm thinking a lot of my content will be like getting started with art journaling or painting or creative practice. Um, and of course people who have been doing it for a while can watch it as well. But like I said earlier on, my creative practice really saved my life, and I just really want to help other people like bring that practice to their lives.
That is and I just want to acknowledge too, like I obviously saw this through a screen, but I was kind of there watching you kind of share what you went through and how difficult that was for you. And I can just imagine like that. I just think that speaks to like the power of art and having a creative practice. And it says a lot that you're like, I want to give somebody else a lifeline,
Uh-huh.
right? Like that you had a lifeline, and you want somebody else that's going through something similar, maybe that you went through, to know that there's a lifeline as well.
Mhm, mhm.
So I just want to
Yeah, and
acknowledge.
even like a lifeline, for mental health reasons, but also, like I was saying, like there's such a big identity shift when you become a mother, or like for some people it's divorce or job loss or, any of that upheaval. Like I just think it's so transformative and healing to have, something that you can tether yourself to say like this is a way that I'm connecting with myself and what I'm going through. Um, and yeah, to just have it be like a little bit of joy, like for time
Right.
for something fun,
Right.
if that you're
Yes.
carving.
Doesn't have to save the world. It's just got to save you.
Right,
Right.
exactly. Right.
I was backing up a little bit, from as long as we've kind of known each other online, you seem very rooted in sort of visual mediums, a variety of visual mediums. And I'm just kind of wondering, I'd like to back up a little bit. And like what your background is and your schooling, was that in those mediums, or is that just through work experience, or just a natural, just like, your own creative leanings?
Yeah, no, I have never gone to like art school or anything. I actually went to school for computer tech, and I plan to go into computational molecular biology. And while I was going,
Wait, I'm sorry. What does that even?
well, so like for example, like the Human Genome Project, if you're familiar with that, like the
Mhm.
mapping of our DNA, like that's it's that kind of work. Although when I
Gotcha.
was in school, like that project had like just started to wrap up, so I would have never worked on that. But that was my plan, was to go into to basically combine like computers and like
Gotcha.
life sciences.
Okay. Okay.
Um, but I started creating websites just as a teenager as a hobby because like that's what everybody was doing then on like girl pages or
Did you have
GeoCities
like
or
the coolest MySpace background and
oh
like
yeah.
extra
Yeah.
coding ever?
Yeah. But not
I
any
would
of
have
the
been
like
jealous.
flashy tacky stuff. Like mine was,
Just like look
yeah.
like a professional. I would have been so jealous. I would have
Yeah.
probably tried to mirror it, not been able to because
Yeah, I forgot about MySpace. No, I was really into MySpace.
yeah.
Um, yeah, so I just started, doing those little websites as a teenager as a hobby. And then when I was going to school for computer tech, as part of that, you had to take like an intro to web design class, which I'd been doing websites for however long, 6, 7 years at that point. And so the TA said she knew somebody who was looking for like a junior web developer at an agency. And at the time I was working, like I was just doing like office work. And so I got that. That was like my first big girl job, like working as a web developer. Well, and it was like a designer developer job. So I was doing both. And yeah, the art stuff though, a lot of people say self-taught, but then they're like, and I've learned from X, Y, and Z. So it's like I'll try to say like I'm trying to think of a better phrase, like community taught or something like
Or
that, where I've taken
self-motivated or self
yeah, yeah,
funded or something. Yes,
yes.
because same. I'm technically self-taught because I didn't go to art school, but like I took this e-course, I followed this artist, I tried this method, yeah, I read this book.
Right. Yeah. Like I never had a curriculum, but I've had a number of, artistic inspirations and mentors and
And so speaking of inspiration, one of the things that I really like to think about is like relationship to inspiration because, and again, getting back to the social media thing, I think there's a whole lot of cutesy little slogans around inspiration, but the reality is very different, at least in my experience. And I was wondering if you can kind of talk about your relationship specifically with the art that you're doing, art and inspiration. Like, do you wait, do you only create when the inspiration strikes? How does inspiration feel to you? Like, what is your relationship to it?
yeah, I definitely don't only create when inspiration strikes because my the life just doesn't allow for that. My son's getting older now, so he likes to come and hang out in the studio and he'll play with clay and whatnot. But historically, he's 5. But historically, it's been, he goes to bed at 7:30, 8 o'clock, and then that's when I come into the studio. And a lot of times it's like, I'm so tired, I'm so drained. So I just tell myself to just take 5 minutes. And, I think we see that like, oh, spend 5 minutes doing it. And then maybe that will turn into 20, but it's like, just do it for 5 minutes and then, move on. I find for me that if I'm not consistent, then it's like when I go to create something, I have to sort of like get to know myself as an artist. It's like, I'm like, none of this is making sense. And then I have to kind of do it daily for a little while before I'm like, oh, okay, I like how this is coming together. So yeah, it's better for me if I'm consistent.
Yeah.
And then I think a lot of this quote by this person I follow on Instagram, Wendy Brightbill, who said, this was years ago that I like wrote this down, but I think about it all the time. And it was just, remember the time when you kept making art and you kept making art and you kept making art. That was important. And so like,
Oh,
it was
wow.
like, it's so simple, but I love it where it's like, okay, I don't like this piece and maybe I don't like this piece. And I don't like the feelings this one brought up, but like turn the page in my sketchbook or, whatever. And then I'm on to something else. And
It kind of reminds me of that. And again, it's a quote you see everywhere, but the how you spend your moments is how you spend your life, which is a
mhm,
really cheap, like it's become so overused that it's become kind of saccharine, but gets back to the idea like you're going to look back and go like I spent however much time creating, and you're probably not going to think about, oh, and I didn't like that piece and I didn't like this piece or whatever. Like
right.
I spent that time creating.
Yeah.
Do you feel like inspiration comes from outside you? Do you feel like it comes from within you?
It definitely varies. And I feel like like anyone who's like artistic or which, I think we all have something, we're all creative in some way, but there's like a different like inner calling to being an
100%.
artist. And I think anyone who's like that is kind of collecting that as they're walking, as you're going about your life. You're like, and then when you get to the paper or the canvas, it's like a way of kind of processing that. Like, for you, probably like, oh, I'm gonna like think about that hike that I went on, or, I don't know if that makes sense, but so, like I'm collecting inspiration. Also, I sometimes listen to a thing that I do a lot if I'm just like not in the zone is I'll listen to some like ambient music. I have a playlist. It's just called Creating, and it's, got a number of songs on it that I have a few forms of synesthesia. So for me, listening to music, particularly in the dark, which doesn't really overlap with creating art, but listening to music is making like colors happen in my brain. So like that's a way to kind of connect, like, I don't know, to sort of like get in flow, like to, sort of disconnect from my mind and just sort of be like, whatever wants to like come through is going to come
Wow.
through.
Wow. Do those colors show up in your paintings? Like when you're choosing like, so for example, the one behind you, would you have maybe seen that listening to some music, seen those colors and then incorporated? Or is that still more intuitive, like once you get to the page?
Yeah, I think they probably do. Like, it probably is like, oh, this song is sort of bringing up this color palette for me, and then those are the paints that I choose. It's not so conscious, really. I'm not like, oh, this song, I keep getting this like shade of orange, so I'm going to use it. Like, it probably is more abstract or like intuitive in that way.
Do you ever go back to your book? What were your leftovers book? And the reason I'm asking is sometimes I tend to use words a lot in my art, and I just have a note a note on my phone that I'll just like literally random sentences, like, so whenever the inspiration strikes. Every once in a while I just go back through it, and plenty of it's like something I wouldn't necessarily use, but every once in a while I'm like, oh, it's kind of cool how I wrote that, or the phrasing of that, or oh, I could switch that around, and then that feels really good. So, and still keeping with this topic of inspiration, do you find that sometimes the inspiration is delayed, right? Do you go back through and like, oh, now I'm inspired by this that I already created, or I had this experience and now it's inspiring me, however long.
Yeah, absolutely. That's one of the reasons I wanted to get into doing the like leftovers book, or like kind of the messy art journaling I used to do before, is because when I'm like in one of my like, I'm going to show this to social media sketchbooks, like this, I'm working on a painting type sketchbook. I do that as scenic writing, and it always means something. It's like something I'm thinking about while I'm painting, but you can almost never tell what it is. And I always think, well, when I look back at this, I'm going to know what I wrote. And I realize I often don't. So now I'll either like write it on the opposite side of on the opposite side of the spread, or when I'm in the like leftovers book, then I would like do more journaling. And it's definitely interesting to look back and think, like I just went through a major like health thing with my sister, and it's been interesting to kind of go back and read the journaling that I did on those pages to sort of think like, oh, okay, that's what it felt like to be in the thick of it that week or whatever. And then yeah, that would turn into another painting probably.
So here's another topic: art and spiritual connection. It's something I think about a lot in terms of my creative process. And I was wondering if there is a connection. And I use the term spiritual as the like broader, like spiritual, not like super defined spiritual. So however you define spiritual, and I was wondering if there's any connection for you there.
There is, which I'm still surprised to hear myself say, because prior to Randy's death, I would have not considered myself a spiritual person. Like I had a lot of resistance to anything, even adjacent to that. And then, when he died, like his best friends who are like very spiritual, like kind of, like they consider themselves witches, were, saying like, oh, we saw these signs, or, whatever. And I'm like, I want that. So I started kind of exploring spirituality more at that point. And now there are definitely times when it's like, I will get into the flow of creating a piece and feel, this will sound like ridiculous, like feel more connected to my husband. And it's been interesting to, kind of think about that as like, I don't know if I believe in like a God. I forget, Julia, Cameron. I'm like, what is the artist, right?
Yeah.
She said at one point, like, she needed to find a connection to something bigger than her, and she was really resistant to the idea of God. And um, gosh, it was such a good quote that I like wrote down, but now I can't remember exactly what she said. But it was something like she was just going to call it like the sun or light or something. I forget exactly what she said, but that's kind of how I think about it. Like I'm not like I think my paintings or when I'm painting, that can be sort of like a prayer or a way to connect with something
Yes.
outside of myself, but I'm not necessarily like, dear Father in the sky.
Yes. Yes, understood. Understood. Yes, and thank you for sharing that. I've asked every single person some form of that, and I'm always a little nervous just because I don't want to. Uh, some I can imagine that sometimes people don't want to share like their personal spiritual beliefs or feel comfortable with that. So thank you for
Oh, sure.
for sharing that. Has your perception of art and the creative practice changed especially since you consider yourself a new artist? So within the last few years, can you look back and see a change in how has it changed for you, if it has?
Yeah, I think prior to, I don't know, I sort of like think of this like shift happened after, after 2020, where in a lot of ways, like my creative practice stopped feeling like a luxury or the thing I did after everything else was done and more started to feel like, a mental health practice or like something that I
Almost a
needed.
requirement, right?
Yeah,
Like,
exactly. It is definitely a requirement. Like I'm in a new relationship now and it's kind of long distance and so sometimes he'll come for, a long weekend. He's here for like 3 or 4 days at a time. And I don't tend to get to the studio those nights because, we're soaking up time together, like just enjoying having someone to watch TV with. And after a few days, I'm like, I'm gonna like I'm bugging out. Like I need to go put some paint on paper. So yeah, I absolutely have to do it.
I have art nights where every once in a while I just tell my husband I'm having an art night. We're not going to watch our little shows together. You need to find somewhere else to go. And
Yeah.
do you find, and this is off the cuff, I'm not even in my notes, but I find that I have to look as much like a gargoyle as possible to get in the mode to create. I don't know what it is. Like I need to be wearing the schlubbiest clothes, like my hair in like the stupid like pineapple, like just I have to be like nothing can be touching me,
Yeah.
like no like defined waistbands.
Yeah. No, definitely. Like I organized my closet recently and I'm like, you have like way more like old art clothes than you have like clothes to wear to a place. Um, it partially because like I'm really messy. Like I always have paint on my hands, paint on my clothes. And inevitably if I'm like, I'll just wear this, but I'll be really careful. Like I will spill like gesso or something all over myself. So,
Oh my gosh.
partially for that reason, which is like kind of making wanting to have like a YouTube process channel kind of difficult because I'm like, I don't necessarily want to look like a swamp thing on video. But
Right, right. And honestly, like I remember seeing on social media something and they were bemoaning. They're like, now, with the advent of like reels and everybody doing process reels, and they're like, I have to look pretty all the way down. And like, no, like I find that to really create, to really get out of like all the crap in my head and the work stuff and the emails and like the computer's pinging or whatever, like I have to look as like non-presentable as possible.
yeah, I'm working on that, on like being a little bit less vain. I think it's like I'm 41, so I'm just experiencing that sort of shift that where like you become invisible to like other people at 40.
It's a
Yeah,
real
it's so wild. And I was really troubled by it until I started to feel like, this year 41, starting to feel like, okay, well, if nobody's paying attention to me, then I can just kind of do whatever. So I think, we'll get to the point where it's like I don't have to have makeup on it to do this art video or whatever. But yeah.
It's interesting that you brought that up. I love it so far. I've loved these conversations because it always something comes up that I like. It's not in my notes and not even to talk about, but it really is because this is midlife artists. Like I'm specifically talking to artists in the middle of their life, the things that we deal with. And I don't know if guys go through this, but women, it is a real, I think most of us would say we felt it once we get to a certain age. All of a sudden, the male gaze just kind of passes right over you.
Yeah.
And I don't know about you, but I was like, it didn't occur. I remember telling my husband, like, it felt weird. And yet I kind of judged myself for it feeling weird because I wasn't trying for the male gaze to begin with. I
Right.
was just like, I mean, I've been married forever. Like, I'm not interested in, we were monogamous. We're not really looking for anything else. Like, I've not been interested in it. So why does it bother me that it went away?
Mhm.
Right. And
Yeah, and I think it's because like the absence of it draws so much attention to the fact that you've been dealing with it your whole life, like in this sort of like low key background static kind of way of like there's always someone looking at me, and then all of a sudden you're like I'm just going through my life and nobody knows I exist, and it's very weird. It's like a
it's just
weird contrast.
discombobulating, right? Like it
Yeah,
just
yeah.
throws you off. And in a time when you were already going through so much personal upheaval,
Hmm.
the nation was going through, or the world was going through some upheaval, and it's just like one more thing to kind of throw you off that, like,
Hmm. Yeah,
so
definitely. Like we were kind of in isolation until until the vaccine for little ones came out, which was 2022. We did outdoor stuff, but I wasn't really going to like restaurants or taking the baby into stores. Um, so it really was like, oh, I've emerged after 2 years to a world that like has
that
like
now I'm invisible to,
right,
right? And it's
yeah,
like, wait, I'm still here. I'm still here.
right.
Um, This is a very esoteric, high level question, so take it in whatever way. Do you think art has a purpose, and what do you think it is?
I definitely think it has a purpose. I know for me, like we've talked about, it's catharsis. But in terms of like being on the receiving end of art, I do think it has a very specific purpose that's extremely important, but I don't know that I have words for that. Like I think maybe I use the word abstract too much, but it's it feels, abstract. But art matters to people. Like you're drawn, if you walk through a gallery, like something that wouldn't necessarily be a topic you're interested in, or like a teacup or still life a teacup or something, you're like, oh, this actually really moves me and like stirs something in me, and you might not know what it is, but it I think that's the point
Yeah,
basically, is like to be
something about
stirring something
connection
in other people.
something about connection or humanity or right. I see what you're saying. It is really hard to put into words like the meaning of it. Um, Yeah, that's something that I remember this class that I was taking that where I got introduced to kind of the meaning. Symbols can have a meaning. Like you can, if you always draw this square, that square can mean something to you, right? Like,
Right.
and they were also talking about like the purpose of art and like you can just make art like just because it's pretty or you like to look at it. Like it doesn't have to have like this, I'm in protest or I'm making this big statement about humanity or I'm trying to change the world or like
Hmm.
and yeah, I think you kind of hit on it where like you can't really name it, but it's like something like inside of us, like a human thing.
Yeah. I think like it's like we need to be doing something tangible. Like, for some people it's knitting. For some people it's quilting, or, for some
Hmm.
people it's all of it. But I just think like in a world that's like largely more and more digital and driven by AI and detached from being human, creating as a way to like just be solidly human, kind of for better or worse.
That brings up a really good, if you don't, because y'all were completely off script at this point.
That's
Um,
fine.
I send people a list of like topics, right? Like just
Yeah.
general, like so nobody's surprised. And I'm completely off at this point. You also have, part of the work that you do is digital, and then you also have this really what has become a really robust and meaningful artistic non-digital art form. And so do you feel a push and pull there? Do you find a way to make them sync? Do you just see this like this is work and then this is not work? I would love your thoughts on that.
Yeah. So are you specifically referencing like I do like the
Like,
branding design, digital design
branding
work
and web
versus
design
like
and all that. Yeah.
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 Yeah. So that's interesting because yes, it is very much like this is my work, like this is my job, and then this is art. And that's been interesting as I'm like intentionally kind of making a shift to like art being more of my work, to like start to get into the frame of mind where like this is work. Like today my son is with my sister, and so I've had the day in the studio, and in my mind I'm like I have childcare, so I should be doing client work, and instead I did a lot of like tinkering around the studio, like playing with like film setups and just stuff that was still like related to work, but wasn't client work. And I've had to work like really intentionally. I was in like an artist, like a little coaching cohort earlier this year, and I was really having to be intentional about being like, this is part of my job now. Like this is part of my real work. But it is hard. I do kind of divide it that way though. Like I rarely would sit down at my computer at 9 p.m. and be like, I'm going to design a logo for somebody, because like I just don't have that
Right.
that mental space at that time. But I can definitely do a painting at 9 p.m. So
Right. So, and that's really interesting. And maybe you can kind of, I think a lot of people might look at like web design, branding, logo creation as a creative business or like an artistic business, like maybe not art, traditional art, but still like a creative business. And I'm wondering if you could maybe pull the curtain back a little bit and kind of share, like, is it just sort of, I don't know, maybe the same way I view the spreadsheet that I just finished for like for somebody? And tell us a little bit about that for maybe
yeah,
those
so I definitely think that graphic design in particular can be an art form for people. There are certainly people who are doing like, beautiful hand lettering sketches and then turning those into, posters and all of that digitally. So I'm not saying that graphic design isn't art. But for me, what I'm doing is more, there's like strategy involved, right? And so it's like I'm thinking about not necessarily, I don't usually get to just think about making something look pretty. I also have to think about like who we're talking to, how is this going to fit in a square on Instagram? Like, everything from like appealing to the correct audience to, the technical specs of, what a logo can and cannot do or be. And what my websites, for a long time, they were very artistic. Like there was a lot of like watercolor. Well, there still are like a lot of watercolor elements and that sort of thing. But it's, so I definitely bring like my aesthetic, I think, to websites, but I definitely don't consider the work that I'm doing for like, that's like strategic for clients to be, I mean, I know it is creative, but I just don't like, I would never be like, I'm a graphic artist.
I get what you're saying. I think it's the perception I was more speaking of. And I think that's really helpful to kind of see behind the curtain, because you think, oh, like, somebody on the outside might think like, oh, you get to pick colors and fonts and all this, and it is creative, but you're like, it actually like that's part of it, but I have to do that in a business mind frame, which is not the same as putting paint on canvas or knitting something. You're not thinking about like, okay, like, will this fit in a certain ratio for a client? Da da da. So,
Right.
does that why have you ever done digital art, or are you like, I have to have something that's not on a computer?
I do play around with like digital abstract art in Procreate sometimes. And I've shared like a little bit of that on Instagram. I really want it to look realistic, which is of course a challenge when I'm used to working with like wet media. But yeah, I do. Like, I just went on a little trip, like to a lake house with my sisters, and I didn't pack up art supplies and take them. I'm like, if I really need to create, I can just do something in Procreate. So that's like a fun way to, do art on the go without having to transport a bunch of supplies. But there's just something special about
Does
the
it feel
tangible
different
mediums.
because it's on a screen versus, or
It definitely,
no, it's still just creating, and creating is what you want to do.
well, so I think the main thing is like, because I can erase, to double tap with your two fingers and like that thing is gone. It's a totally different, and of course, like less, I don't know, like less intuitive or less, like I'm not in the flow of creating in the same way as I am with working with paint. That's sometimes literally flowing around the page. It's, I can clean up my messes and, yeah, so it's not just like a cathartic process. It's just like, it's more of a thinking process, I think.
Yeah. No, that's really fair. Even though you consider yourself a new artist, I would say that you've had some sort of creative expression for a long time, as you've mentioned, like, creating, the perfect nice layouts.
Yeah.
So I'm going to ask this question, and the question is like, what would you want to tell your younger self or somebody starting out? And that might also go into like, you could say that as an artist, and then you can also tell me that maybe as like from the creative coach and mentor that you also are perspective, however you wanted to think about that.
It's the only thing like I would think of. I mean, I don't think I would tell my younger self anything about like how my life has gone over the past 5 years because it's been kind of a tire fire. But I think I would encourage my younger self to more like lean into that, like whatever it is like inside of me that was called to be an artist, and to, you know, to think about, I guess, to take it more seriously, for lack of better phrasing, like instead of it being like this sort of like silly luxury, to more allow that to be, to let that passion like come forward, to like to allow myself to like express myself in that way, I think. Instead of it just being like, oh, I like to do this silly painting thing sometimes, to just be like more aware of like the calling to be an artist.
And then my last, we will be wrapping up shortly, but one of my, what has become my favorite part of the of the show is I always ask people to tell me about their favorite piece of garbage advice. And let me tell you, like, they've been great answers.
Yeah.
Sometimes I feel like we learn more with the garbage. Like, no, absolutely not.
So as a widow, you hear a lot of really stupid things from well-meaning people. The worst one is like, everything happens for a reason. This will make sense to you one day. It's like, no. And my husband died 5 years ago, and the responding officer said that to me that day, like the guy who had, you know, the police officer who had been there the whole time. Yeah, he said, this will make sense to you one day. Like it will. And it's like, it's never going to feel like, oh, thank goodness my husband died, because if not. So that's the most garbage advice, is like, everything happens for a reason, I think.
I hope he gets his face ripped off.
He was actually a very nice guy. Like he was very, I'm grateful for his presence that day, but it was just, that was the first person who said, everything happens for a reason. Like this will make sense one day. And it's just like, another person dying didn't happen for like the bigger picture of my life. Like it wasn't like I'm the main character, and that was just like a story development arc.
Totally. So. Thank you, Evan, for your time. I have loved your hearing your perspective and your process, and I cannot wait to see you on YouTube. And so you'll have to let us know, or let me know, so I can share with everybody when those videos come up, so that we can all appreciate them. And I would encourage everybody to go to Evan's Instagram, where she shares her art, which is just something just really just feels like just really like right here for me. So thank you so much for your time and your grace, and sharing just so candidly.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a really lovely talk, and I appreciate your support as an artist friend.
Yes. So, all right. Thanks, everybody. We will be signing off. We'll see you soon. Bye, guys.
Bye.